The winter did not arrive gently. It descended without warning, tightening its grip across Europe with a severity few living had ever known. Rivers froze solid in days. Crops, already weakened by erratic seasons, were locked beneath iron layers of ice. In villages and cities alike, food stores dwindled rapidly as the cold deepened. By January of 1709, the land itself seemed to resist life. What followed was not a single disaster, but a slow, relentless unraveling of entire societies, one that would leave millions struggling to survive in what became known as Great Frost of 1709. The years leading up to 1709 had already tested Europe's resilience. The late 17th and early 18th centuries fell within a climatic period often referred to as the Little Ice Age, a time marked by colder-than-average temperatures and unstable weather patterns. Harvests fluctuated unpredictably. In some regions, excessive rain ruined crops; in others, drought reduced yields. Populations, however, continued to grow, placing increasing pressure on fragile agricultural systems that depended heavily on consistent seasonal cycles. By the autumn of 1708, many parts of Europe were already facing shortages. Grain reserves were lower than expected, and prices had begun to rise. Rural communities, reliant on their own harvests, entered winter with limited ease. Urban populations, dependent on supply networks, were equally vulnerable. When winter arrived earlier than anticipated, there was little margin for error. The cold intensified rapidly in early January 1709. Contemporary accounts from France, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe describe temperatures dropping to extremes that froze wine in barrels, split tree trunks, and killed livestock in their enclosures. The frost penetrated deep into the soil, destroying not only winter crops but also seeds that would have been used for spring planting. Olive trees in southern Europe, some decades old, were permanently damaged or killed, an economic loss that would take years to recover. Transportation systems collapsed under the conditions. Roads became impassable, and frozen rivers, while initially offering temporary passage, soon became dangerous and unreliable. Trade slowed dramatically. Regions that might have relied on imports found themselves isolated. Markets emptied quickly, and food prices surged beyond the reach of ordinary people. France, already strained by the ongoing War of the Spanish Succession, was among the hardest hit. The war had drained state resources and disrupted agricultural production. When the frost struck, the kingdom lacked the reserves necessary to respond effectively. Grain shortages turned into widespread famine. Bread, the staple of the population, became scarce and unaffordable. Reports from the time describe long lines forming outside bakeries, only for supplies to run out before most could be served. In rural areas, the situation was equally severe. Farmers who had lost their crops had no means of sustenance or income. Livestock deaths compounded the crisis, eliminating not only food sources but also essential labor for future planting. Without animals to plow fields, recovery became even more difficult. Some communities resorted to consuming seed grain, sacrificing the next harvest in order to survive the present. Elsewhere in Europe, similar patterns emerged. In parts of Germany and the Low Countries, freezing temperatures destroyed vineyards and orchards. In Italy, especially in the north, agricultural losses were extensive, with wheat and other staple crops failing completely. Eastern Europe, including regions of Poland and Russia, experienced prolonged cold spells that extended well into the spring months, delaying any possibility of recovery. The human toll grew steadily. Malnutrition weakened populations, making them more susceptible to disease. Epidemics often follow famine conditions, and this period was no exception. Illness spread through overcrowded towns and impoverished rural settlements, further increasing mortality rates. While exact figures remain uncertain, historians estimate that hundreds of thousands, and possibly over 1 million people across Europe, died as a direct or indirect result of the crisis. Governments attempted various responses, though their effectiveness varied widely. In France, authorities imposed price controls on grain and attempted to regulate distribution. Relief efforts were organized in some regions, including the importation of grain from less affected areas. However, logistical challenges and the scale of the disaster limited the impact of these measures. Corruption and hoarding also undermined relief efforts, as merchants sought to profit from scarcity. In some regions, local communities organized their own survival strategies. Shared resources, communal kitchens, and mutual aid became essential. Religious institutions played a significant role, providing food and shelter where possible. Yet even these efforts could not fully counter the widespread shortages. The economic consequences extended beyond immediate hunger. Trade disruptions affected entire industries. Textile production declined as both raw materials and labor became scarce. Markets shrank, and economic activity slowed significantly. Governments, already burdened by war expenditures, faced declining revenues, complicating their ability to respond to the crisis. The agricultural damage of 1709 had lasting effects. The destruction of perennial crops such as vineyards and olive groves meant that recovery would take years, not months. In many regions, farmers had to replant entirely, often without sufficient resources or labor. Soil conditions, affected by the deep frost, further delayed planting. Even when temperatures normalized, yields remained low for several seasons. Social tensions also intensified. Food shortages often lead to unrest, and this period saw an increase in riots and protests, particularly in urban centers. Crowds gathered to demand affordable bread, sometimes attacking grain shipments or merchants accused of hoarding. Authorities responded with varying degrees of force, attempting to maintain order while addressing the underlying shortages. The crisis also influenced migration patterns. Some individuals and families left severely affected regions in search of better conditions elsewhere. This movement, while offering opportunities for survival, also placed additional strain on receiving areas, which were often dealing with their own shortages. Climate historians have since examined the causes of the extreme winter of 1709. While precise explanations remain complex, factors such as atmospheric circulation patterns and volcanic activity may have contributed to the sudden and severe temperature drop. The event stands out even within the broader context of the Little Ice Age as one of the most intense winters recorded in European history. The Great Frost also exposed structural weaknesses in early modern European societies. Agricultural systems were highly dependent on stable weather and lacked the diversification or technological resilience seen in later centuries. Storage and distribution networks were limited, making it difficult to respond to large-scale shortages. Political and economic systems, strained by ongoing conflicts, were often unable to provide effective relief. In the years that followed, some changes began to emerge. Governments became more aware of the need for improved grain storage and distribution systems. In certain regions, agricultural practices gradually evolved, with increased attention to crop diversification and resilience. While these changes were slow and uneven, they reflected lessons learned from the devastation of 1709. The memory of the Great Frost lingered for decades. It was recorded in chronicles, personal accounts, and administrative documents as a defining event, one that reshaped communities and economies. For those who lived through it, the experience underscored the fragility of human systems in the face of environmental extremes. By the time Europe began to recover, the immediate crisis had passed, but its effects remained visible. Fields once productive required years to restore. Populations in some areas took time to rebuild. Economic disruptions had long-term consequences for trade and development. Yet the event also contributed to a gradual shift in how societies approached risk, preparation, and resource management. The Great Frost of 1709 was not a single moment of catastrophe but a prolonged test of endurance. It revealed how interconnected climate, agriculture, economy, and society truly were. When one element failed, the consequences spread rapidly across all others. The winter's severity turned ordinary hardship into widespread crisis, demonstrating the limits of existing systems and the need for adaptation. In examining this event, it becomes clear that its significance lies not only in the scale of suffering it caused but also in the insights it offers into resilience and vulnerability. The experience of 1709 did not immediately transform Europe, but it left a lasting imprint on its historical trajectory. It stands as a reminder that environmental forces, often beyond human control, have the power to shape societies in profound and lasting ways.